I'm Kristen Farrah, lead producer of Radio Health Journal. I spoke with Dr. Edgardo Padin-Rivera for a segment that aired in November of 2022. In this interview, we discuss Padin-Rivera's military experience, the challenges he and so many veterans face after leaving service, the role of military indoctrination, and the unique therapy approach needed to help veterans. Start off in the beginning. I talked to Suzanne Gordon yesterday or a couple days ago. A lot of what we talked about was military indoctrination. Can you explain what that is?
Okay. So GI stands for government issue. That tells you a lot about what recruitment and training of soldiers is about. Soldiers are people, young men and women, in a very, if you will, a time of their life when they're easily influenced. They're 18, 19, 20. They're looking for their own personality, who they are, what will they be in the world. And these young men are taken during that time into the military, and they are indoctrinated to become government issue. That's what we're told that we are going to become when we get there. So the first thing that they do is they strip away everything having to do with your civilian life. They cut your hair very, very short. They give you a uniform that everybody has, and anything having to do with your civilian life and anything before it is psychologically stripped away so that you become what the military wants you to become, which is a soldier, i.e., a fighting machine. That indoctrination takes place during early basic training. That's a lot of what basic training is about. Basic training, what it basically does is it conditions future soldiers in whatever way possible to respond to a perceived threat with a fight response. So our amygdala and our brains responds to any given threat in one of two ways. These ways are you either flight, that is, you get away from the danger or any threat, or you fight against it. And so what the military does basically in early basic training is it teaches men, young men, and now young women to not flee from the threat, but to fight it, to go against it, to attack it, to destroy it in multiple ways. One of the ways they do that is by guilt. You are now in the military, you are associated with a group of people, other soldiers, who you must protect, and they must protect you from any kind of an attack. And so anyone who doesn't do that is made to feel extremely guilty. Anyone who doesn't train for that is made to feel like they are less than. And so the only option left for these soldiers in training are when they perceive an attack on others around them who are their quote unquote brothers, and we've heard that term, brothers in battle, is to fight, is to go and do something to help them and yourself put down the attacker. So that's one way that they do that. Also, you are fighting for your country. You are fighting for your society. You are fighting for your tribe. And that puts the pressure on you to make sure that you don't allow the greater social way of life that you have to be destroyed by this enemy that is coming at you. The enemy is an important aspect of this. The enemy is an evil thing. One of the things that you do in basic training, that they do in basic training, is they try to dehumanize the enemy so that other soldiers who are the enemy are no longer human beings. They are things. They are things that destroy. They are things that come at you. One way to do this is to create slurs around the enemy. So you've heard the term gook. A gook is a Vietnamese soldier, but the term gook is actually a connotation for horrible, terrible enemy that is coming to kill you. And so you use that term not only to instill the fear in the soldier, but also to turn that particular person who you're fighting against into a caricature of what that person is. It is no longer a human being with complex emotions and family and other things. It is just merely a terrible enemy that you must destroy. And that's the way you must think about them. And so You've heard these slurs over and over again across different wars, across different time periods. In World War II, it was the Japs or the Krauts. In the Vietnam War, it was the gooks or the pajamas, the black pajamas. Not even a human being, just a black pajama. And in the most recent wars, like the Iraqi war, it was the Haji. The Hajis are coming, or Alibaba was the other term that was used. So these are terms that soldiers learn in order to dehumanize the enemy, and that affords them the ability to kill, not necessarily with impunity, although in some cases, yes, but without the guilt that you might feel in killing another human being. So that's another aspect of early military training.
Do you have any specific examples of events during basic training that is specifically there for rewiring the soldiers' brains?
Oh, sure. Well, they use those terms all the time. Okay. That you're going to go kill gooks. That's your job. And these are not people. They are the enemy, and you cannot think of them other than as the enemy. Now, this works for a lot of people and doesn't work for others, quite frankly. And thus you have people who, after the episodes are over, they feel very guilty. But a way to do that is to use that conversation about gooks and the first sergeant or the training instructor to intimidate the soldier at the same time. And they use such things as, my job is to kill gooks. And you say that over and over and over and over. The sergeant says it, you say it, you're made to shout it, you're made to feel as one comrade group whose main body is to destroy the enemy and to move on and to keep moving on. So these are voiced shouts, cheers, whatever they may be, to get people and young men to think in that direction.
Do you think it's a valid...
There's an interesting movie that people who are interested in this may want to see, and that's called Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket was a 1970s movie. It's about training, military training, right before the Vietnam War. And it shows the dehumanization effect that goes on, both for the enemy and the soldiers themselves, who are made to feel less than complex human beings and more just simple killing machines, GIs, if you will, government issues. And it's a very good documentary because it shows how it destroys the complexity of the human response to others. Others, other than themselves, are made to feel like they are either a threat, people to be used, or people who are to be disregarded, because that's the only response possible for a soldier.
Do you think the whole indoctrination is necessary for military training, for what they're...
Well, that's an interesting question, because I'm talking to you from my experience as a veteran of the Vietnam War. Many of those tactics have changed. One of the reasons that they have changed is because the concept of battle and war and what we're doing has changed. One of those concepts now has become not just defeating the enemy, but of building a society where we are ensconced, such as Afghanistan, building a society that reflects our values, if you understand what I mean. And so a lot of soldiers now are no longer trained to just kill the enemy, although that happens, but they're also trained to find a way to engage with the people of where they are, so that they begin to feel some kind of allegiance with us. A very good concept of that now is my daughter is married to an Afghanistan veteran, and his job was very much unlike mine. My job was to go out there and destroy whatever was out there along with my comrades. His job was to gather together the children of the Afghanistan towns and make sure that whenever there was a bombing going on, he would take all the children and have them placed in a safe place so that they would not get hurt. Every society values their children tremendously. Seeing soldiers value those children also making sure that they're in a safe place when bombs come, was very important to bonding that society with the United States and with the military. So soldiers are taught different things now. And it's not as brutal and it's not as dehumanizing as it used to be. I say that because I've talked to many soldiers who have come back from the war, and they tell me that basic training is not quite, it used to be in basic training, sergeants would grab you, shake you, throw you on the ground. They're not allowed to touch soldiers anymore. They're not allowed to intimidate them in that way anymore. You cannot use slurs like we used to do, things like kraut and Jap and gooks. So there's a lot of limitations now placed on that. It's probably more based on guilt and a duty that you must somehow help your tribe survive, that you must help your brothers around you and keep in bonding with them so that they don't die and you don't die. It's more of that than it is the other, much more brutal type of indoctrination that used to go on.
You're a veteran. Can you tell me what your position was?
Oh, I was an enlisted man. So, of course, you know, there's officers and there's enlisted man. I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, Berkeley Springs, about 90 miles outside of Washington, D.C. As soon as I got out of high school, in fact, before I got out of high school, I had to not enlist, but I had to, I forget what they call it now, but I had to show that I could enlist in the military. I did not want to enlist. I was just one of those guys who, I didn't care about the war. I didn't know what was going on. As most young people, they really are not all that up to date on what's going on in a war that the United States is doing. But sometime I went to one semester of college. I dropped out. I didn't have enough money. 2 months later, I got my notice to go into the military. So I went into the Army. I was a private. I went through basic training. I went through advanced infantry training, which basically meant I went through training to go to Vietnam. And so after I got through with that, that's where I ended up. I ended up in a town called Saigon. You may have heard of Saigon. Your generation doesn't know too much about that, but Saigon is what is now called Ho Chi Minh City, which at the time was the capital of South Vietnam. I was stationed at an air base about 30 miles north of Saigon called Bien Hoa Air Base. As an enlisted man in the Army, one of the things that we did was we protected the air base because it would get bombed and infiltrated every day. So our job was to protect that air base because we had a lot of equipment, a lot of jets, a lot of other people there. And so I spent, about a month at protecting that air base. And then one of the things that we did, I was part of a helicopter company. And as part of the helicopter company, my job was to load and unload soldiers into the field. So we would have 8 or 9 helicopters full of soldiers, infantrymen. We would drop them off in a fire zone, and then we'd get out of there as quickly as we could. And we would come pick them up 3, 4, 5, 6 days later. So that was the job while receiving fire. And so did that for a while. And then at some point, there's something called the DROS, which you may not know, which is when your deployment is over. And one of the things about Vietnam, as opposed to World War II, is that deployments were only for a year, unless you wanted to extend them. So after a year, people went back home. And when the deployment was over at my company where I was, for the company clerk, I petitioned the company commander, who knew me well, for me to become the company clerk. So for the rest of my time in Vietnam, after 4 months, I actually was a company clerk for my company. I was radar. And a simple enough job, although I was out in the field with all the soldiers too. It wasn't like I was in headquarters. I helped to write a lot of letters to the families of soldiers who had died. I talked to a lot of soldiers who had been in combat and were really stricken by what happened to them, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, the feelings of betrayal. That was the beginnings, I think, of my interest in helping these guys, because I really felt for them and what their life was going to be like. And there was some military psychiatry presence in Vietnam, but not anywhere near enough. And not only that, but we didn't know what was going to happen. At the time, that stress, that trauma that we saw as a result of war, it was believed that it would go away once the soldiers came home back to their civilian lives. We had no idea of the long lasting effects of trauma on these men and women. So I stayed there for a year, came back home, and got married. And amazingly enough, and I had no idea that this was going to happen to me, I went through my own series of PTSD episodes. I remember coming home, not being able to sleep, having nightmares. I was sweating so much in the middle of the night that we had to change the bed sheets, sometimes a couple times at night. And then I started into drugs. My marriage fell apart. I tell people my 20s were probably horrible, but I don't remember them, so I don't know. I was like so drugged out and so crazy during that time. I ended up using every kind of drug possible. I ended up in jail. I just had a terrible 20s. I was like terrible. Um, and and all that time, I had no idea what was wrong. I had no idea what was going on with me. All I knew was that I was angry. I was confused. I was afraid. I believed that I was a horrible person for what I had done or what had happened. And of course, society didn't help during that time because there were forces in society after we came back telling us that we were horrible and terrible for what we did in Vietnam. So it was a very conflicting war. And the conflict, this is how I used to tell it to my veterans. It's as if you got raped and people were telling you that it was your fault. So not only were you going through the trauma of being raped, which is horrible trauma, but then you're told, well, you shouldn't have been there. It was your fault. You shouldn't have gone to war. You shouldn't have been in that street corner so people could grab you and rape you. So those kind of conflicts were going on during that time in society. It was a very difficult time, the 70s and 80s.
What was it like going from being in the military, thinking how they want you to think, and then having to detangle yourself from that and go back to being a civilian?
It's very difficult. And that's why I was going through my 20s. It was expected that I would go back and become a civilian, get married, forget about the war, and just, get a job and move on. That's what was expected. It's always expected of war soldiers that that's what's going to happen, especially those who don't have any physical wounds to show. And so everybody thinks, well, he's got his hands, he's got his legs, he's got his head, he's looking good, he'll be all right. Go on, go to college, which I tried to do and couldn't for a long time. Go to college, get married, have kids, get a job, you'll be fine. Well, we couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Many of us couldn't do it. And so we fell into substance abuse was a good way to kill the memories, to stop the pain, to not have to adjust in any way. The problem is this, that when you come back from war, you feel like you're very different from the civilian world, from everybody else. You cannot make the bonding contact that is necessary to come out of isolation. And so you feel isolated from the world that you're in. You feel like you're walking in this world and it's not your world. And that makes you feel very lonely, very isolated. And so you try to find ways to connect. And it's a long, long process unless you have someone who systematically can help you get through that process. And so how did I feel? Confused, lonely, isolated, angry. All these emotions were just swirling around me. This lasted for a good 10 years. I was lost. How did I come out of it? I haven't the slightest idea. One morning I woke up. For a long time, I thought about suicide. I used to have a gun under my pillow, not for anybody else, but for myself. And one morning I woke up and I said, I can't keep living this way. I need to find some other way to live. And that's unusual. That's unusual. But one of the ways that I found was to decide that maybe I can help others get through whatever it is that they're going through. So I went to graduate school and I got my doctorate. And after that, I went to work for the VA.
Do you think it's important for veteran therapy to come from a professional who's also served in the military?
Very important. Very important. First of all, it's important because I understand them. But aside from me, it's important because in any therapeutic endeavor, no matter what it is, a person has to open themselves to the other person who is trying to do therapy. So in order to do that, if you think about it, it's much easier for someone to begin opening themselves to another human being who they believe understands where they are coming from. So here's the anecdote to that. When I started in the VA, I started as a substance abuse counselor. It was soon found out that by the veterans that I was a Vietnam veteran, that I had been to Vietnam, that I was a combat veteran. And they all wanted to see me. And they all wanted to see me because they believed that I could understand what was going on for them. Why was it that I was going, why was it that they were going through all this confusion, all this behavioral discontrol, all this anger? They felt like I could understand that. And in a sense, they were right. And so in order to build the initial bond in therapy, and if you can't build a bond in therapy, you can't do therapy. But in order to build the initial bond in therapy, the person who is seeking therapy has to believe that this other person in front of them understands, in some way, understands what they are going through. And so that's why actually I became a PTSD therapist, because the demand was there for me to become one. I did not really have a career future goal of being just in PTSD. I joined the VA because my belief is that mental health issues are not simply the result of an individual going wrong. It is the result of the environment and poverty and social strictures fixing upon the individual problems that they cannot overcome. And so the VA afforded me a way to treat people who were poor, who were in poverty, who were sick and had no other means of getting mental health treatment. So, of course, I was also interested in soldiers. But those are the reasons that I joined the VA and the reasons that I started my career in that regard.
When you were going through that 10-year period in your 20s, did you ever reach out to get resources from the VA?
I never did. There's a really good question. Actually, when I came back from Vietnam, in my mind, the idea was, forget it. Forget that past. Forget what you did. Forget what happened. And I was also, I must say, leaned a little bit on the idea that I hated that war, that war was, quote unquote, crap, that it was a violation of our trust in the United States. I wanted nothing to do with the military or the VA or anything else. One of the first things that I did was I threw all my military medals, my gear, my uniforms, everything into the Dipsy dumpster and just walked away from it thinking I'll never have anything to do with the military ever again. So no, I did not go to a VA. To me, the VA was anathema.
Thanks for listening to our interview with Dr. Edgardo Padin-Rivera. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Kristen Farrah.